It's a little embarrassing because I'm one of the old timers. So they come up, oh yeah, you've been a cardinal for 13 years. You were there in 2013. So yeah, I'm honored, that they would, not just to me, but the other old timers that are around.
In a moment charged with both reverence and ambiguity, Cardinal Timothy Dolan stood before a hushed congregation at St. Patrick's Cathedral and uttered words that would echo far beyond the Gothic arches of New York's most iconic church. We're convinced that even though Pope Francis has passed over from this life to the next, he still lives. He still lives. We don't call him Holy Father for nothing. With those solemn words, Dolan did more than offer a eulogy in advance. He cracked the sealed doors of the Vatican's fortress of silence. This was not a statement delivered during a memorial or days after an official confirmation. It was said while the Holy See remained mute, while the world still asked, "Is the Pope alive?" Dolan's proclamation signaled not only the end of Pope Francis's life, but also the unraveling of the Vatican's carefully controlled narrative. Vatican secrecy and the unraveling timeline. To understand the impact of Dolan's statement, one must look back at the cloud of confusion and secrecy that preceded it. On February 14, 2025, the Vatican released an uncharacteristically brief statement. Pope Francis had been admitted to Rome's Gemelli Hospital due to mild respiratory complications. It was a vague report, notable for its lack of detail. Within hours, major international news agencies like Reuters and AP repeated the Holy See's language, emphasizing that the situation was under control. But those reassurances quickly began to falter. Within days, unnamed sources close to the Pope leaked that Francis had developed double pneumonia, a perilous condition for anyone, but particularly alarming for a man approaching 90 years old with a history of lung issues dating back to his youth in Argentina. Leaks from clerical staff and visiting doctors suggested that the pontiff was heavily sedated, struggling to breathe, and communicating only through weak gestures. Still, the Vatican said nothing further. A cathedral's whisper becomes a global roar. It was against this backdrop of tension and half-truths that Cardinal Dolan stepped to the pulpit on February 23rd, during a St. Patrick's Day Mass in New York. Before a cathedral packed with more than 100 faithful, many of whom had gathered in vigil, he spoke plainly. Pope Francis is in extremely fragile condition. He may be close to death. Please pray for him. The line, probably close to death, reverberated across parishes, newsrooms, and social media like a gong. It was the first time any high-ranking church official had publicly acknowledged what many feared, but none dared say aloud. Some saw it as a breach, others as a breakthrough. Dividing the faithful, praise, outrage, and open questions. Cardinal Dolan's statement created immediate divisions within the global Catholic community. Among everyday parishioners, many interpreted his words as an honest call for prayer, driven by compassion and transparency. But among Vatican loyalists and more conservative clerics, the statement was seen as an act of premature mourning, or worse, insubordination. He dug a grave in front of a living man, wrote one devout Catholic on X, formerly Twitter, voicing what many others echoed. That's not just tactless, that's terrifying. Critics across Italy's priesthood avoided public comment, citing the lack of an official statement from the Holy See. Meanwhile, Dolan's supporters flooded Reddit forums and Catholic Facebook groups defending him. He's telling the truth because no one else will, one user argued. The Church needs truth more than diplomacy right now. Media firestorm. The Vatican whistleblower? The American media wasted no time. Fox News quoted Dolan verbatim, highlighting the phrase, "It's not looking good," in bold captions across TV screens. CNN and MSNBC invited theologians and former Vatican correspondents to analyze the implications. The New York Times ran an op-ed titled "Dolan's Honesty or Rome's Denial." Simultaneously, religious YouTube channels with hundreds of thousands of subscribers released sensational videos. One, titled "Dolan, Vatican Whistleblower," racked up 750,000 views in 3 days. Another speculated that Dolan was the canary in the conclave, assigned to soften public reaction before the Pope's eventual death announcement. The more traditional Catholic press, such as the National Catholic Reporter and America magazine, responded more cautiously, but still acknowledged that Dolan's remarks had shifted the narrative away from the Vatican's carefully managed silence. An outsider at the center of it all, Cardinal Timothy Dolan is no stranger to controversy or cameras. As a former president of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, he has long been one of America's most prominent and media-savvy clerics. His appearances on Sunday talk shows and nightly news segments are frequent, and his forthright manner has earned him both fans and critics. Known for his jovial personality and deep New York accent, Dolan has a way of speaking plainly, sometimes too plainly for the diplomatic corridors of Rome. But this was new territory. Never before had he spoken so openly about the Pope's mortality, especially in a vacuum of official communication. Rome responds with silence. While the media flurried and American Catholics debated Dolan's intentions, the Vatican responded with nothing. For nearly 2 months following Dolan's February statement, there was no clarification, no denial, no confirmation of Pope Francis's declining health. Photos released by the Holy See were either outdated or heavily staged. One blurry image of the Pope reading scripture in the hospital was quickly dissected by internet sleuths, many claiming it was a recycled photo from 2023. And Dolan? After his statement, he offered no follow-up, no clarification. He had lit the match, then walked away. April 21st, 2025. The silence breaks. On the morning of April 21st, the world awoke to confirmation that Pope Francis had died at 7:35 a.m. at Gemelli Hospital. The cause? A stroke that had induced a coma, followed by heart failure. The announcement was delivered not by Dolan but by Cardinal Kevin Farrell, prefect of the Dicastery for the Laity, speaking on behalf of the Vatican. It was a moment of global mourning, but also a moment of retrospective reckoning. The speculation, the debates, the silences, it had all led to this. Dolan, who had predicted this moment nearly 2 months earlier, was nowhere to be seen. The Cardinal's mysterious silence. For the first 72 hours following the death announcement, Cardinal Dolan made no public appearance. There was no statement from the Archdiocese of New York, no press conference, no homily, no post on social media. For a man whose words had stirred a global storm, his silence was deafening. Some described it as respectful restraint. Others saw it as avoidance or even guilt. News outlets began referring to it as the Dolan void. Parishioners in New York asked clergy why their cardinal hadn't spoken. Journalists speculated whether he had been silenced by Vatican officials or had simply chosen to step back. Did he know more than he said? One of the lingering questions surrounding the entire episode is whether Dolan knew something the rest of the world didn't. Was his February statement merely heartfelt intuition? Or was it rooted in classified information from inside the Vatican? The answer remains unclear. What is known is that Dolan has long enjoyed close ties to several high-ranking members of the Curia. His influence stretches beyond American borders. Some reports claim he had received updates from clerics inside the papal household, and others hint he may have been encouraged to test the public's reaction. Whether rogue or calculated, His February remarks now seem prophetic. A church at a crossroads. The death of Pope Francis has plunged the Church into a period of reflection, not just on the Pope's legacy, but on the structures of secrecy that still define Vatican operations. Cardinal Dolan's actions have reopened the conversation about transparency in the Catholic hierarchy. Who has the right to speak, and when? For now, Dolan remains a polarizing figure. To some, he is a truth-teller. To others, a disruptive force. What is undeniable is that he exposed a rift, not just between New York and Rome, but between the Vatican's traditions of discretion and the modern world's hunger for honesty. The missing voice in a moment of global mourning. In the immediate days following the death of Pope Francis, much of the world turned its eyes to the Vatican, awaiting statements of tribute and guidance from prominent church leaders. Among the most anticipated voices was that of Cardinal Timothy Dolan, the Archbishop of New York, one of the most recognizable Catholic figures in the United States, and a man once floated as a possible papal candidate. Yet, in those crucial hours, Dolan's absence from the conversation spoke louder than any words. To some, Dolan's silence seemed appropriate, even dignified. They believed that he was choosing not to politicize a moment of profound grief with commentary that might stir controversy or reopen debates surrounding his previous remarks about Pope Francis's declining health. Others, however, were deeply disappointed. They expected Dolan, who had been one of the first to publicly suggest that Francis was nearing the end of his papacy, to now say something meaningful, something that would mark the spiritual transition from anticipation to reality. His silence wasn't just noticed by observers in the U.S., it echoed throughout the Catholic world. Even the Italian Catholic press, which is typically cautious about speculating on foreign cardinals, began to comment on his conspicuous quiet. A poignant line from Avvenire, the official news outlet of the Italian Bishops' Conference, encapsulated the atmosphere. Cardinal Dolan, who spoke when everyone was silent, is now silent when everyone is waiting. That single sentence captured the irony and gravity of Dolan's absence. It wasn't just a missing statement, it was a missed presence. Silence as symbolism, a cardinal under watch. What made Dolan's silence even more notable was that it occurred as bishops across Rome held public memorials, issued moving tributes, and participated in processions filled with solemnity and emotion. Meanwhile, in New York, one of the Church's most influential dioceses, there was a chilling void. No formal statement, no immediate public mass in Pope Francis's honor, no gestures of official mourning from Dolan, who had previously never shied away from the spotlight. It took 4 days after the Pope's death before Dolan reappeared in a public setting, a routine mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral. Those in attendance noted the casual, almost light-hearted tone of the service. There were no allusions to the death of the Pope, no formal mention of Rome. For many, this was bewildering. How could the leader of such a powerful archdiocese remain silent during such a historic moment? His demeanor was calm, composed, almost detached, yet unmistakably intentional. The funeral, a gaze that said everything. On April the 26th, 2025, the funeral of Pope Francis was held in St. Peter's Square. It was a spectacle of solemnity and reverence, drawing hundreds of thousands of pilgrims to Rome and millions more via television and streaming services. World leaders, religious authorities, and nearly every cardinal in the Church were present. Among them was Cardinal Dolan. By this point, Dolan's silence had become a story in itself. So when cameras caught his entrance into the square, journalists zoomed in, scrutinizing every movement, every glance. And then came the moment that would be replayed across Catholic media. As he entered the square, Dolan paused, just slightly, but noticeably, and fixed his gaze upon the large portrait of Pope Francis adorning the basilica's facade. Italian commentators described it as a lingering look that seemed to say something never spoken. It wasn't what Dolan did, but what he didn't do that stirred reaction. No speeches, no interviews, not even an off-the-cuff remark. But the gaze alone was enough. Italian media latched onto it, crafting headlines that described Dolan's silence as an eloquent mourning, and his presence as a message beyond words. A whisper in the Vatican chapel. Later that evening, Dolan participated in a small private mass in a side chapel within the Vatican. He was joined by a handful of American and Latin American cardinals. It was here, in this more intimate setting, that Dolan finally broke his silence, if only briefly. Delivering a homily, he remarked, "He has long prepared us for this day." That single sentence sent shockwaves across Catholic media in the US and abroad. Blogs, news outlets, and analysts began to parse its meaning. Was it merely a tribute, or was Dolan subtly signaling that Pope Francis had orchestrated a spiritual and institutional handover before his passing? Was this, in effect, Dolan's way of saying that the Church was ready, not just for grief, but for what comes next? The rise of the silent endorsement. Upon returning to New York, Dolan resumed his liturgical duties, but something had shifted. Observers began to notice subtle yet unmistakable changes in his tone. His homilies began to include language about legacy, stewardship, and loyalty to those who came before. He didn't mention Pope Francis or the Vatican, but the themes were clear. The faithful didn't need explicit confirmation. The messaging was there, layered beneath familiar liturgical language. This phenomenon soon earned a name among Catholic commentators: the silent endorsement. Dolan hadn't issued a eulogy or press statement, but through his manner, phrasing, and timing, many believed he had confirmed what Rome had left unsaid, that Pope Francis had prepared the Church for a new direction, and that Dolan was aligned with that vision. The cardinal, known for his media savvy, never corrected or clarified these interpretations. He didn't have to. When Dolan appeared on a Fox News broadcast in early May and was asked about Pope Francis's final days, his response was cryptic, yet potent. "I think we all sensed it before, not because of who said it, but because the truth can't be hidden forever." Once again, a single phrase stole headlines. He didn't confirm anything, but nor did he deny. For many, this was the Dolan strategy in action, an interplay between revelation and restraint. More than a cardinal, the man behind the signals. Cardinal Timothy Dolan is no stranger to media attention. Long before this moment, he had cultivated a public persona that balanced orthodoxy with accessibility. A former president of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, Dolan has spoken out on issues ranging from immigration and religious liberty to bioethics and civil rights. His television appearances are marked by charm, clarity, and wit, a rarity in a church often perceived as distant or opaque. In the polarized landscape of American Catholicism, Dolan has emerged as a rare bridge figure. Traditionalists appreciate his reverence for doctrine and ritual, while more progressive Catholics respect his pragmatism and openness to dialogue. That balancing act, increasingly difficult in a fractured church, may be his most valuable asset. Kingmaker or successor? Dolan's role in the conclave. As the College of Cardinals prepares for the conclave that will elect Pope Francis's successor, Dolan's name has surfaced, not necessarily as a frontrunner, but as a kingmaker. At 75, he remains eligible to vote and influence outcomes, though age and regional tradition suggest he's unlikely to ascend to the papacy himself. Historically, popes have emerged from Europe or Latin America. regions with deeper institutional weight within the Vatican. But what Dolan lacks in statistical likelihood, he makes up for in influence. His ability to shape consensus, especially among American, Canadian, and some African and Asian cardinals, has made him a behind-the-scenes force. The media has dubbed him the scene maker of this year's conclave, a cardinal who may not wear the crown, but helps decide who will. His now famous February remarks, when he said he believed Pope Francis might not have much time left, are being reinterpreted not merely as speculation, but as part of a carefully timed strategy. In hindsight, Dolan's early signaling may have positioned him at the center of the Church's transitional narrative. The Vatican's unofficial spokesman. In an institution that thrives on discretion, Dolan's blend of visibility and ambiguity is unique. He doesn't break Vatican protocols, but he pushes the boundaries of public expectation. He understands how a sentence can spark headlines, how silence can invite speculation, and how media interpretations can shape ecclesial narratives. While many cardinals remain reclusive or media-averse, Dolan understands the rhythms of digital communication. He knows how to plant an idea without owning it outright. That mastery of the message, knowing when to speak, what to say, and just as crucially, what not to say, has elevated him from being just another cardinal to a global religious figure. For many Catholics, especially in the US, Dolan represents what a modern cardinal should be: accessible yet grounded, clear yet nuanced, personable yet faithful to tradition. It's no wonder that both conservatives and progressives have found reason to claim him as an ally, even if for very different reasons. A moment that defined a legacy. Looking back, the days between Pope Francis' passing and Dolan's eventual public return now appear choreographed in retrospect. From his silence in New York to his symbolic gestures at the funeral, from the cryptic homily in Rome to his television appearance, Dolan maintained a careful balance of distance and presence. He neither hijacked the narrative nor abandoned it. He didn't announce a transition, but became the transition's emotional anchor. If he is not chosen as the next pope, Cardinal Dolan will nevertheless be remembered as one of the most pivotal figures in the Church's most sensitive recent moment. In a faith tradition that venerates silence as much as proclamation, Dolan has demonstrated how both can be equally powerful. The final word, a cardinal who made us listen. The story of Cardinal Timothy Dolan, in the wake of Pope Francis's death, is not merely about ecclesiastical succession or internal church politics. It's about how presence, measured, strategic, and emotionally resonant, can shape the perception of a global institution. Dolan may not have spoken at the height of the morning, but in doing so, he became the subject of global conversation.